Hello everyone, and welcome back to today's History Official. Today, we open a time capsule and step into one single date, September 16th, a day that across centuries kept returning to reshape lives, maps, and even our planet. What ties a ragged group of pilgrims crossing the Atlantic in 1622, a modern environmental treaty signed in 1987? How can the roar of a tank on a muddy western front be connected to a quiet desk in Devon, where a future literary genius is born? Over the next hour, we'll follow those threads because history isn't a set of isolated facts. It's a web of cause and consequence. And September 16th is one of those threads that runs through warfare, independence, commerce, tragedy, and global cooperation. Let me give you a quick map of where we're headed. We'll begin with the Mayflower. Leaving Plymouth in 1620, the voyage that helped seed what would become a new nation in North America. We'll jump ahead to 1810. To the moment in Mexico, known as El Grito de Dolores, the spark that ignited Mexican independence from Spain. We'll look at industry and innovation with 1908, the founding of General Motors, which transformed modern transport and global business. Then we'll slow down and examine a darker moment, the 1920 Wall Street bombing. A violent shock that rocked New York and fueled fear. We'll explore wartime policies when President Roosevelt signed the United States. First peacetime draft in 1940. We'll cross continents and examine nation building in 1963, when Malaysia was formed, and then in 1975, when Papua New Guinea won independence. We'll remember the catastrophic 1978 Tabas earthquake in Iran, a natural disaster that left tens of thousands dead, and we'll close with a hopeful note. The Montreal Protocol in 1987, a landmark environmental treaty that started to heal the ozone layer. Each of these events is powerful on its own, but together they show the range of human experience, migration, and settlement, the fury and cost of revolution, the birth of corporate power, political violence, conscription, and global war. Decolonization, the sudden violence of nature, and ultimately the possibility of international cooperation to fix a global problem. That arc, from conflict to cooperation, is what makes September 16th such a fascinating date. As we go, I'll do more than tell you what happened. I'll walk you into the scenes. You'll hear the creak of a ship's timbers, smell the smoke in Moscow, feel the tremor after an earthquake, and sense the quiet urgency in the meeting rooms where diplomats negotiated a worldwide treaty. You'll meet people who made decisions, leaders, ordinary citizens, victims, survivors, and the innovators who changed how we live. And here's why this matters. When we look back carefully, patterns emerge. We see how migration and displacement shape national identities. We see how violence and insecurity push societies toward new laws and institutions. We see how a local disaster can prompt a global response. Those lessons show up again and again in our world today. If you love history, told as a series of connected human stories, not just dates on a page, then you're in the right place. Before we dive in, two quick things that really help the channel. Hit the like button if you want more deep dives like this. And if you're new here, click subscribe to today's History Official and ring the bell so you don't miss future episodes. Check the description for timestamps, source links, and a short reading list if you want to go deeper after the video. Now, settle in. We start with the creaking deck of the Mayflower and the bold, uncertain people who crossed an ocean searching for a new life. Let's travel back to 1620. Imagine a gray morning on the south coast of England. The wooden hull of a merchant ship creaks and groans. Ropes strain. People move with purpose, some excited, many anxious, all uncertain about what waits beyond the horizon. It is September 1620, and the ship is the Mayflower. On board are roughly 100 men, women, and children. They are a mixed group. Some are the separatists pilgrims who fled religious persecution in England and spent years in Lebanon, the Netherlands, dreaming of a place to worship freely. Others are what historians call the strangers, craftsmen, laborers, and families who came not purely for religion, but for the promise of land, opportunity, and a fresh start in a distant world. Together, they represent a fragile experiment, an attempt to build a new community from scratch on the far side of the Atlantic. The voyage itself is no leisurely cruise. The Mayflower is not large by modern standards, a working merchant vessel adapted for passengers. Space below decks is cramped. The hold is damp and smells of tar, rope, and human breath. Weather is a constant threat, Violent storms can lash the rigging, and fog can hide treacherous shoals. Seasickness becomes common. Food is simple: hardtack, salted meat, peas, and whatever little preserves they can manage. Water is rationed and grows stale after days at sea. Still, people on board make plans. They pray, they carve out routines, they discuss, argue, and try to create a fragile sense of order. The pilgrims read scripture and hold worship services in cramped quarters. The strangers trade stories of what they hope to find: timber, land, new trade. Hope and fear live side by side on that ship. After weeks of cold nights and rolling waves, November approaches. The Mayflower is driven far to the north of the area the passengers had intended to reach. They had hoped for the mouth of the Hudson River land closer to the established English colonies to the south. Instead, they sight Cape Cod and the bare, rocky coast of what we now call New England. Now they face a choice: try to sail south along a dangerous coastline in worsening weather, or put ashore and begin life on unfamiliar ground. The group makes a pragmatic decision given their mixed composition and the difficulties of reaching the intended destination. They will seek to establish a settlement where they can somewhere to disembark, build shelter, and survive the coming winter. But before they step onto the sand, there is a political problem. The ship carried colonists who were supposed to be under the jurisdiction of a company with legal authority in Virginia. Far from that authority and in need of unity, the passengers realized they must create a temporary agreement to govern themselves. Men gather together on board and craft a short but powerful document, a covenant to form a civil body politic for their better ordering and preservation. This compact, penned and signed that autumn, would later be remembered as the Mayflower Compact. It is not a detailed constitution. It is, instead, a practical pledge to make laws, enact just and equal ordinances, and obey the will of the community for survival. Stepping ashore is both relief and hardship. The land is cold and unfamiliar. Dense woods, rocky soil, and a climate harsher than many expected confront them. They work desperately to build shelters and a common house for the winter, cutting timber with basic tools, hauling stones, and pitching thatch. The coming months are brutal. The first winter at Plymouth is a catastrophe in human terms. Disease, scurvy, pneumonia, dysentery spreads through the makeshift village. Many who had the strength when they left England fall ill and die in this new world. Families are broken. Graves dot the cold earth. Yet, even in hardship, some acts of care and courage persist. Neighbors help the dying. Survivors tend to the children. A few hardy souls keep watch for supplies and potential threats. Then, in the spring, the colony's fortunes begin a fragile change. Local Wampanoag people, indigenous inhabitants of this region, observe these newcomers. A man named Samoset walks into the settlement speaking broken English and startling the settlers. Shortly after, Squanto, a Patuxet native who had been to Europe and learned English, teaches the colonists essential survival skills: how to plant corn using fish as fertilizer, how to fish in local waters, and how to avoid certain poisonous plants. These lessons are not mere advice, they are life-saving knowledge. A defensive and diplomatic arrangement follows, and a formal peace is later agreed between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag leader. Out of dire struggle, tentative cooperation forms. The harvest the following year is enough to sustain the survivors, and the Pilgrims hold a harvest celebration, a 3-day event of food, prayer, and shared feast with native allies. Over time, that event comes to hold a special place in American memory as an origin story, though the real history is far more complex than the tidy myth we often tell. What does the Mayflower story mean beyond hardship and survival? Several things. First, it is a story of migration and religious aspiration, but it is not the whole story of America's first European settlements. The motives of the Mayflower passengers were mixed: religious devotion and economic hope, fear and ambition, prayer and profit. Second, the Mayflower Compact, brief as it is, represents an early experiment in self-government, a practical acknowledgement that in the absence of established authority, people must create, by agreement, rules to live by. That compact's spirit, community, consent, and common rules resonates with ideas that later shaped American political thought. But we must also remember what the Mayflower's arrival meant for the land's original peoples. The arrival of settlers marked the beginning of major changes: trade, disease, alliance, and eventually, conflict. The story of Plymouth is not merely one of triumph, it is the opening chapter of a longer, often tragic narrative about colonization, dispossession, and cultural transformation. So, when we stand back from the rock-strewn shore where the Mayflower's passengers first set foot, what do we see? We see courage and desperation. We see faith and pragmatism. We see small acts of generosity and the harsh calculus of survival. And we see the beginning of a complicated relationship between newcomers and native peoples that would shape centuries. As you listen, consider this. Why do we remember the Mayflower so vividly? Is it the ship itself, the idea of crossing an ocean to try again? Or is it the complex blend of hope, governance, survival, and consequence that the story contains? The Mayflower is both a vessel and a metaphor for how communities form under pressure, for how ideals meet reality, and for how the choices of a few can send ripples through history. Next, we'll move forward to centuries to a very different kind of awakening, one that rings out from a small Mexican town and changes the political map of an entire continent. But before we go, take a moment to picture that cramped, creaking ship, the smell of tar and rope, the cold wind off the North Atlantic, and the people who decided that, whatever waited on the other side, it was worth the risk. It is the early hours of September 16, 1810. In a small town called Dolores, nestled in the heart of New Spain, what we know today as Mexico, the bell of a parish church rings out through the darkness. Its echoes cut across the silence of the night, waking families, farmers, and townsfolk. They rise in confusion, some clutching rosaries, others grabbing crude weapons, and they gather outside the church. At the center of this moment stands a priest, Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. He is not a soldier. He is not a king or a general. He is a parish priest, 57 years old, with fiery eyes and a voice that carries conviction. But tonight, he will become something far greater. The voice of a people yearning for freedom. For 300 years, Mexico has lived under Spanish colonial rule. Land is concentrated in the hands of a few. Indigenous communities are oppressed. Mestizos, those of mixed ancestry, are looked down upon. Wealth and power are reserved for the Spanish-born elite, while the vast majority toil in poverty. Taxes are crushing. Trade is restricted. Dissent is silenced. Yet beneath the surface, anger simmers. Inspired by the Age of Enlightenment, by the revolutions in America and France, and by Spain's own weakness under Napoleon's occupation, whispers of rebellion spread through the colonies. Hidalgo, along with other conspirators, has secretly plotted to rise up against Spanish authority. But word has reached the government, and arrests are imminent. Time is short. So, on that night, September 16th, Hidalgo acts. He seizes the moment, throws open the doors of the church, and delivers what history remembers as the Grito de Dolores, the Cry of Dolores. The exact words he spoke are lost to history. But tradition holds that his voice rang with a fiery declaration, calling the people to rise against tyranny, to reclaim their dignity, and to fight for independence. He invoked the Virgin of Guadalupe, a powerful symbol of unity for the Mexican people, and he denounced the rule of Spain. His cry was not polished rhetoric, it was raw passion, a call to arms, a demand for justice. The people responded. Farmers, laborers, and townsfolk rallied. They armed themselves with machetes, clubs, and makeshift weapons. Within days, an army of thousands was on the move, poorly trained, poorly equipped, but driven by an unstoppable force. The dream of freedom. The movement surged across the countryside. Cities fell. Spanish loyalists fled. And for the first time in centuries, the colonial order shook at its foundations. Hidalgo marched his forces toward Mexico City, the heart of Spanish power. The road ahead, however, was anything but simple. His army, while vast in number, lacked discipline. Violence erupted. Control was fragile. And by 1811, Miguel Hidalgo himself was captured and executed. Shot by a firing squad, his head displayed as a warning. Yet execution did not silence his cry. In fact, it amplified it. Others took up the cause. Jose Maria Morelos, Vicente Guerrero, and countless nameless men and women who refused to submit. Over the next decade, battles raged, alliances shifted, and blood was spilled. But the seed had been planted. In 1821, Mexico finally achieved independence, ending 3 centuries of colonial rule. Today, every year on the night of September 15th, leading into the 16th, Mexico commemorates this moment. In town squares across the nation, crowds gather, flags wave, and the President of Mexico himself reenacts the Grito de Dolores, ringing a bell, shouting Viva Mexico, Viva la Independencia. The echoes of Hidalgo's voice, across centuries, still live on. Why does this moment matter so much? Because it was not just a political rebellion, it was a movement of ordinary people, indigenous, mestizo, poor, and oppressed, who demanded a future where they could decide their own destiny. The Grito de Dolores is a reminder that revolutions do not always begin in palaces or battlefields. Sometimes, they begin in the voice of a parish priest, ringing out from a small church at dawn, calling a nation to rise. So, as we reflect on September 16, 1810, ask yourself this: what makes a revolution endure? Is it the leaders who light the spark, or the people who carry the flame? In Mexico's case, it was both. A cry for justice became a cry for freedom. And that cry still resonates today, every time the bell of Dolores is rung. It is September 16, 1908, in the industrial city of Flint, Michigan. America is in the middle of rapid transformation, factories are booming, cities are expanding, and the automobile, once a luxury toy for the wealthy, is beginning to capture the imagination of ordinary people. On this day, an ambitious businessman named William C. Durant takes a bold step. He founds a company that will not only change how people travel, but how the entire world moves. Its name: General Motors. But to understand why this moment is so important, we need to step back. At the turn of the 20th century, automobiles were still experimental machines. They were noisy, unreliable, and expensive. Roads were built for horses, not cars. Most people still saw the automobile as impractical, some even dismissed it as a fad. But visionaries like Durant saw something else: the future. Durant was not an engineer. He was a salesman, a master of promotion, and a man with a gift for building companies. Before entering the auto industry, he had made a fortune in carriage manufacturing. He understood one key thing: if automobiles could be produced at scale, with reliability and style, they could replace the horse-drawn carriage. Durant's genius lay not in building a single car, but in building an empire of cars. Instead of focusing on one model or one company, he envisioned a corporation that would bring together multiple automakers under one umbrella, each with its own brand identity, appealing to different markets and customers. And so, in 1908, General Motors was born. Within its first year, it acquired Buick, quickly followed by Oldsmobile, Cadillac, and eventually Chevrolet. Each brand brought something different to the table: Buick for reliability, Cadillac for luxury, Chevrolet for affordability. Durant was creating not just cars, but an ecosystem, a company that could offer a car for every American, no matter their income or taste. The rise of General Motors coincided with America's love affair with the automobile. By the 1920s and 1930s, cars were no longer just a way to get from point A to point B. They were symbols of freedom, status, and identity. Roads expanded, gas stations popped up everywhere, and the American landscape itself was reshaped around the automobile. GM became a powerhouse, employing thousands, driving economic growth, and pushing innovations from electric starters to automatic transmissions. But GM's story is not just about business success. It is also about the changing world. During World War II, GM factories retooled to build tanks, planes, and military vehicles, becoming an essential part of the Allied war effort. After the war, GM's cars became icons of the American dream: sleek, powerful, stylish machines that symbolized prosperity. By the 1950s and 1960s, General Motors was the largest automaker in the world, producing millions of vehicles annually. In fact, it was so dominant that 1 in every 2 cars on the road in the United States was a GM vehicle. Of course, the story also has its challenges. In later decades, GM faced competition from Japanese automakers like Toyota and Honda, struggled with oil crises, and had to adapt to environmental concerns and economic downturns. The company even filed for bankruptcy in 2009 before reinventing itself for the modern era. Today, GM is once again a leader, this time in the race toward electric vehicles and autonomous driving. So why does September 16, 1908 matter? Because it marks the beginning of a company that helped shape the 20th century. General Motors didn't just build cars, it built the highways, the suburbs, and even the culture of mobility that defined modern life. It proved that automobiles could be more than machines. They could be dreams on wheels. When you see a Cadillac glide down the street, when you hear the roar of a Chevrolet Camaro, or when you plug in a sleek new electric vehicle, you are witnessing the legacy of that day in 1908 when William Durant founded a company that set the world in motion. And so, as we look back on this historic moment, one question remains: how will General Motors shape the next century? From gasoline to electric, from steering wheels to self-driving cars. The journey that began on September 16th is still unfolding. It is September 16th, 1920. The streets of Lower Manhattan are buzzing with life. Bankers, brokers, and office workers are going about their day near the headquarters of J.P. Morgan, one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. The hum of horses and carriages mixes with the growing sound of automobile engines. Wall Street is the beating heart of American capitalism. And then, at precisely 12:01 p.m., disaster strikes. A horse-drawn wagon parked right outside the Morgan building suddenly explodes. The blast is catastrophic. Shards of metal, hidden inside the wagon, tear through the crowd. Windows shatter across the financial district, sending glass raining down onto the sidewalks. In a matter of seconds, 38 people are killed and over 400 are injured. The explosion is so powerful that it leaves scars on nearby buildings' marks that can still be seen today. Panic spreads instantly. People believe New York is under attack. Some even think it might be the work of foreign powers. But as the smoke clears, one thing is certain. America has just witnessed one of the deadliest terrorist attacks on its soil in the early 20th century. Now, the question is who was behind it? Investigators quickly discover that the wagon was packed with dynamite and heavy iron sash weights, designed to maximize destruction. But unlike today, there were no surveillance cameras, no forensic labs that could instantly analyze DNA or fingerprints. The case relies on witness testimony, clues on the street, and the political climate of the time. And that political climate was tense. The year was 1920, a period marked by unrest, fear, and revolution. The First World War had just ended, but the Russian Revolution of 1917 had inspired radical movements across the globe. In the United States, labor strikes, anarchist plots, and bomb scares created an atmosphere of paranoia. Just a year earlier, in 1919, a wave of anarchist bombings had already shaken the nation, including attacks on government officials. Many immediately suspected anarchists or communist sympathizers were behind the Wall Street bombing. The style of the attack, the symbolism of striking at America's financial core, and the use of a wagon bomb all pointed to radical groups. Yet, despite years of investigation, the perpetrators were never definitively caught. The government's response was swift and harsh. Authorities cracked down on immigrants, radicals, and labor activists. The bombing fueled the Red Scare of the 1920s, a period in which fear of communism and anarchism led to mass arrests and deportations. Some historians argue that the real legacy of the bombing was not just the destruction it caused, but the way it deepened suspicion, division, and government surveillance in America. The symbolism of the attack is striking. By targeting Wall Street, the bombers struck at the very heart of America's power, its financial system. But the message they tried to send was overshadowed by the tragedy it caused and the backlash that followed. Even today, the Wall Street bombing remains an unsolved mystery. No one was ever charged, no group ever formally claimed responsibility. It lingers in history as a dark reminder of how fragile peace can be, even in the most powerful cities on Earth. Think about this. New Yorkers who walked past the Morgan building that day probably thought it was just another ordinary Thursday. But in an instant, everything changed. The blast not only shattered windows, it shattered a sense of security. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of the Wall Street bombing. History is not just shaped by wars and presidents, it is also shaped by moments of fear and chaos. By acts of violence that force societies to confront their vulnerabilities. When we walk through the streets of Manhattan today, past the towering skyscrapers and bustling stock exchange, it's easy to forget the violence of that day in 1920, but the scars remain etched into the stone walls, etched into the memories of history. September 16, 1920. A date when terror struck the financial capital of the world. And when New York learned that even in times of prosperity, danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. It is September 16th, 1940. The world is on the brink of chaos. Across the Atlantic, Europe is engulfed in the flames of war. Germany has conquered Poland, Denmark, Norway, and much of Western Europe. France is under occupation, and Britain stands alone, facing the Nazi war machine. The United States, still recovering from the Great Depression, watches anxiously. The American public is divided. Should the nation intervene in the war or stay isolated, protecting its own shores? President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, fully aware of the rising global threats, makes a historic decision. On this day, he signs into law the Selective Training and Service Act, the first peacetime draft in United States history. For the first time, American men aged 21 to 35 are required to register for military service. This decision sparks intense debate across the nation. Isolationists argue that America must not involve itself in foreign conflicts. Others see the draft as a necessary step to prepare the nation for the looming possibility of war. Roosevelt's vision is clear. The United States must be ready to defend democracy, even if that means preparing for a conflict that has not yet reached American soil. The Selective Service Act marks a turning point in American military history. Prior to this, the U.S. had relied on volunteer enlistments, but the scale of the global conflict necessitated a larger, more organized force. Training camps are rapidly established, and young men across the country begin their induction into the Army. For many, this is the first time they will leave their homes, face rigorous training, and prepare for the possibility of battle. But the draft is not just about numbers, it is a reflection of a nation coming to terms with its role in a rapidly changing world. Roosevelt delivers speeches emphasizing that preparedness is the key to security. He warns that isolation alone will not protect America from the consequences of global instability. Citizens are reminded that freedom and democracy must sometimes be defended actively, even before a direct threat reaches American shores. The law also introduces new challenges. Families worry for their sons, brothers, and husbands. Communities face the uncertainty of sending young men into military service. The draft is met with protests and support alike, highlighting the tension between national security and individual liberty. Yet, for those who serve, it becomes a defining moment, a preparation not just for war, but for understanding their place in the broader sweep of history. In hindsight, the 1940 draft would prove crucial. Within a year, the attack on Pearl Harbor would catapult the United States into World War II, and the men who had trained under Roosevelt's peacetime draft would form the backbone of the American military response. This act, signed on a quiet day in September, became the foundation for the nation's readiness, and ultimately, for victory in a world war that would reshape the globe. September 16th, 1940. A day when foresight and preparation shaped the course of history, demonstrating that leadership sometimes requires difficult, controversial decisions. Roosevelt's peacetime draft stands as a reminder that history is not just made on the battlefield, it is also made in the offices, speeches, and policies of those who dare to plan for the uncertain future. It is September 16th, 1963. A new chapter in Southeast Asian history begins. On this day, the Malaya Federation, Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore come together to form a new nation, Malaysia. For decades, the region had been shaped by colonial rule, local kingdoms, and cultural diversity. But now, a bold experiment in unity and nation-building is underway. The road to Malaysia's formation was far from simple. The Malaya Federation had gained independence from Britain in 1957, but leaders knew that joining forces with Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore could create a stronger, more influential country. Political leaders like Tunku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of Malaysia, envisioned a federation that could harness the strengths of its diverse regions economically, politically, and culturally. However, this unification was not without controversy. Each territory had its own unique identity, ethnic makeup, and local challenges. Sabah and Sarawak, located on the island of Borneo, were geographically distant from the Malay Peninsula. Singapore, a bustling trade hub with a predominantly Chinese population, brought additional economic and political complexities. Negotiations were intense, and leaders worked tirelessly to create agreements that would respect local autonomy while fostering national unity. The formation of Malaysia represented more than just a political act. It symbolized hope for economic growth, social cohesion, and regional stability. It was a message to the world that post-colonial nations could chart their own destinies, uniting diverse peoples under a common banner. Yet, challenges lay ahead. Within a few years, Singapore would separate from Malaysia in 1965 due to political and economic tensions, proving that nation-building is a delicate, ongoing process. September 16th remains a day of celebration, marking the courage and vision of leaders who sought to create a new nation from the mosaic of cultures, languages, and traditions. For citizens, it is a reminder that unity requires compromise, vision, and a shared commitment to the future. Malaysia's birth was a beacon of hope in a world grappling with the legacies of colonialism and the quest for self-determination. As we reflect on this historic moment, we see the profound impact of leadership, negotiation, and collaboration. The creation of Malaysia reminds us that history is not only written in battles and treaties, it is also crafted through diplomacy, vision, and the courage to imagine something greater than the sum of its parts. It is September 16th, 1975, a day that forever changes the map of the Pacific. On this day, Papua New Guinea officially declares independence from Australia, stepping into the world as a sovereign nation. For centuries, this diverse land had been home to hundreds of indigenous communities, each with its own languages, cultures, and traditions. The journey to independence was long, complex, and deeply significant. The road to sovereignty began in earnest after World War II. Papua New Guinea had been under Australian administration, but the local population yearned for self-determination. Leaders and communities worked tirelessly to develop political structures, establish governance, and prepare the nation for independence. The process required balancing the rich diversity of more than 800 indigenous languages and numerous cultural groups, ensuring that every voice had a place in shaping the future. On the morning of September 16th, celebrations erupted across the country. Flags were raised, national anthems were sung, and a sense of pride filled the air. For the people of Papua New Guinea, independence was not just a political milestone, it was a cultural renaissance, a reclamation of identity, and a step toward controlling their own destiny. Yet, independence also came with challenges. Papua New Guinea faced economic development hurdles, geographic isolation, and the task of unifying a country of immense cultural and linguistic diversity. Political leaders had to navigate these complexities carefully to create a stable government that could represent the nation as a whole. Despite the obstacles, the spirit of unity and resilience prevailed. Papua New Guinea's independence inspired other nations in the region, demonstrating that with determination, planning, and collaboration, even the most diverse lands could find common ground and self. As we remember September 16th, 1975, we see more than a date on the calendar. We see the birth of a nation, the triumph of self-determination, and a powerful example of how diverse peoples can come together to write their own history. It is September 16th, 1978, a day that will forever be etched in the memory of Iran. In the early hours, a catastrophic earthquake strikes the city of Tabas, located in the eastern part of the country, measuring a staggering 7.8 on the Richter scale. This earthquake brings unimaginable destruction, leveling homes, schools, and entire neighborhoods. The city, once home to tens of thousands of people, is transformed in a matter of minutes. Streets are filled with rubble, cries for help echo through the ruins, and families are torn apart. Reports estimate that approximately 25,000 people lost their lives, and thousands more were injured. Entire communities were wiped out, leaving survivors to grapple with loss, trauma, and the daunting task of rebuilding their lives from nothing. The geography and timing of the earthquake amplified its devastation. Tabas is located in a seismically active region where tectonic plates meet and stress accumulates over centuries. The combination of poorly constructed buildings and the immense force of nature made the disaster even more catastrophic. Rescue and relief efforts were immediate but faced enormous challenges. The remote location and damaged infrastructure hindered access, yet humanitarian organizations, the Iranian government, and international aid groups worked tirelessly to provide assistance. Stories of heroism, resilience, and community spirit emerged as survivors helped one another amid the devastation. The Tabas earthquake was more than a natural disaster. It became a pivotal moment in modern Iranian history. It highlighted the need for better urban planning, stricter building codes, and effective disaster preparedness. lessons that continue to shape policies today. As we reflect on September 16, 1978, we are reminded of the fragility of life and the incredible resilience of human communities. The tragedy of Tabas underscores how even in the face of overwhelming loss, hope, courage, and solidarity can emerge. On September 16, 1987, the world took a groundbreaking step toward protecting our planet. On this day, the Montreal Protocol was signed by 24 countries, marking a pivotal moment in environmental history. But why was this treaty so crucial, and how did it come to be? Throughout the 20th century, human activities had begun to reveal a dangerous side effect: the depletion of the ozone layer. Scientists discovered that certain chemicals, particularly chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, were rising into the stratosphere and breaking down the ozone that shields life on Earth from harmful ultraviolet radiation. Without intervention, the consequences could be catastrophic: higher rates of skin cancer, damage to crops, and disruption of ecosystems. The Montreal Protocol represented an unprecedented global agreement. Countries from around the world came together to phase out ozone-depleting substances, recognizing that the environment knows no borders. This treaty was not just a scientific victory, it was a triumph of diplomacy, cooperation, and foresight. The negotiations were complex. Industries relied heavily on CFCs for refrigeration, air conditioning, and aerosol sprays. Convincing nations to take bold steps meant balancing economic interests with the urgent need to protect the planet. Yet, the protocol was designed with flexibility, allowing for adjustments, financial support for developing countries, and timelines that ensured a fair transition. Since its adoption, the Montreal Protocol has become one of the most successful environmental agreements in history. Ozone-depleting substances have sharply declined, and signs of recovery in the ozone layer are already visible. Scientists now believe that with continued commitment, the ozone layer could return to its pre-1980 levels by the middle of this century. September 16, 1987, reminds us that humanity can come together to solve global challenges. It teaches us that urgent action, guided by science and cooperation, can prevent disaster and create a sustainable future for generations to come. And that's a wrap for September 16th in history. From the brave journey of the Mayflower settlers to the bold Declaration of Independence in Mexico, the founding of General Motors, the shocking Wall Street bombing, the creation of Malaysia, the independence of Papua New Guinea, tragic events like the Tabas earthquake, and finally, the groundbreaking Montreal Protocol today reminds us just how much a single day can shape the world we live in. History isn't just about dates and names, it's about human stories, choices, and events that continue to impact us today. By looking back, we gain insight, wisdom, and inspiration to make better decisions for tomorrow. If you enjoyed this journey through time, make sure to like this video. It really helps us reach more history lovers around the world. Subscribe to today's History Official and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And don't forget, you can also check out more amazing historical deep dives through the link in our bio. Which event from September 16th surprised you the most? Was it the Montreal Protocol's impact on saving the ozone layer, or perhaps the inspiring independence movements? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your insights and starting conversations with fellow history enthusiasts. Stay curious, stay inspired, and remember, history is alive and it's happening every day. See you in the next episode, where we continue exploring the moments that changed our world.